framework. Hot chocolate, red well. Azure Cosmos, Data. Entity framework, power tools. Technology suite.
Countdown commencing. T-minus 2 minutes.
Jeremy Lickness.
Shiloh Dent.
Grace Lanson.
Martha Vickers.
.NET Data. T-minus 1 minute. Thirty seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We are go for .NET Data Community Standup.
Welcome. We're here again with another .NET Data Community Standup. And this week we have Adrian Hall joining us, who is going to talk about Azure Mobile Apps. So that's going to be interesting, talking about syncing offline data. So we'll get to that pretty soon. Jeremy actually is leaving our team on the .NET Data. He's going over to work on web stuff. Boo. I think you'll all agree, and I think you should comment in chat that he has to keep coming on the show, because otherwise I'm going to have to do another intro, because it says Jeremy Lickness right there in the intro. I'm going to have to re-record it. We'll have to just bleep it over or something and put a big thing on it. Anyway, Jeremy is with us for now, and obviously me and Shai here as usual. So, ask questions in the chat. We'll get to them either straight away, or we'll come back to interesting questions at the end, but definitely ask your questions. And as always, before we get to the main topic, let us do a state of the unicorn. And hopefully everybody knows it's all about EF7, EF Core 7.0. So, that's supposed to say RC1. Our GA version is not on NuGet now. The RC1 version is on NuGet now. The RC1 is on NuGet now, but ignore the RC1 because there's now over 80 additional fixes that are in the daily builds that we have ready for RC2, which won't be out for a number of weeks yet. But it's super easy to get the daily builds. Go to github.com/EFCore. Right on the page there's a link to the daily builds. I'm going to show it in a second anyway. The daily builds are basically very close to what we're going to ship for GA. We don't have anything currently planned. Shai maybe has one tweak, but we don't have anything currently planned to go into the EF7 builds that are not in the daily builds. That doesn't mean things won't go in, because while we fixed 351 issues, that's enhancements and bug fixes in EF7, And you can use it with .NET 6 and ASP.NET Core 6 ECT, etc. You don't need to go to a new platform. And the what's new in EF7, which I'll show you in a second, uses the daily builds. But we need your feedback. Try it now, because while we don't plan to fix any more issues currently in EF7, when you find those bugs, if we can, we'll try and fix them before the GA. So get the daily builds now, much better than RC1, 80 additional fixes, and we'll try and fix them for the GA release, which we still have a couple of weeks to basically do that. Shai?
Just to add on that, I know some people, when they hear the words daily builds, it evokes all kinds of, it's scary and it's going to be unstable and it's going to be complicated to set up. It's really not. They're only more stable than whatever is already out there in RC1. They're only you're only playing it safer by using a daily build at this point, for sure.
Yeah.
That's almost always true, but it's even more true right now, because we're basically just stabilizing. So that is what it is, and it's literally just a matter of putting a new feed in your NuGet.config. It's super easy to do. Thanks, Arthur. You have the exact thing. There's a guide there, so really just try it out. And like Arthur said, there's still time for us to fix critical bugs, so we can do that. Just please file those issues for us.
Yeah, so to do it, like I said, you can go to .NET EF Core on GitHub, and there's directions there. But really, all you need is a NuGet.config file right next to your solution where you're trying things. And then that file, it just has, and you can copy and paste this directly from GitHub. It just basically has a NuGet feed in here. So you'll get packages from NuGet.org, but you'll also, before that, get packages from the .NET 7 feed, which contains all of the EF Core 7 packages in there. So then you just go into your normal package management stuff in whatever IDE or command line or whatever, and tell it to get the latest versions. And all of that is, like I said, it's in the doc, so it's super easy to do. And if you want things to try out, then we have this what's new in EF Core 7.0, and this has and we're adding to this all the time, but it's currently got JSON columns. And there's quite a lot of details in this thing, about things you can do, what they mean, how they work. So queries, we've got updates, we've got all of that stuff in there. And then there's stuff on execute, update, and execute, delete. This is the new kind of batch or bulk updates. How you use that with inheritance, for example. As we go down, we've got the TPC inheritance mapping. So there's samples for that. And all of these samples are on GitHub. You just download the GitHub repository. There's links in here in each case to where you can find them. So, as we go through the rest of here, so reverse engineering, this is in our main, this is T4 template, this is in our main doc. So we just got a link to it from the main docs. Bryce already did the proper documentation for that. Model building conventions. So this is, being able to, you can see here, we've got, this is the sample in the GitHub repo that it comes from. So download the GitHub repo and find model building convention sample. And then you can run that, debug into it, all of that good stuff. So all of this is here already. There's quite a lot here. I think we've got stored procedure mapping coming. It's not pushed to live yet, but it's there and it'll be pushed to live very soon. Already 48 minutes of stuff to read, so you better get started, because we're putting more stuff in there, and it'll be over an hour before you know it. So anyway, so that's where we are. That's State of the Unicorn, and with that, let's go over and talk to Adrian about Azure Mobile Functions.
Great.
Adrian, go ahead. What have you got to show us? What are you going to tell us?
Further ado. So Azure Mobile Apps is actually a really old project. It's been around 9 years now, I think it is, and it got re-energized a couple of years ago for ASP.NET Core. And in essence, for those that don't know what Azure Mobile Apps is, it's a client-server application. So the client side is your mobile applications or your web applications. And the server side is an ASP.NET Core web API that implements basic CRUDL with some opinions, and the two together work together to allow you to synchronize a database table from the server to the client, go offline, do any changes you want to the offline database, and then when you come back online, you can resynchronize and replay all the changes that you made to your main production database, and have all the conflict handling and such like that you need to do it. So
awesome.
As I said, we've done a lot of work to ensure that it works with the latest stuff. I actually just yesterday recompiled it all with EF7, the latest EF7 data, and shockingly, it worked first time. I didn't need to do anything, so you can use all the latest stuff with it. So how about we just take a look at some code and show people how
That
to.
sounds great. Yeah, let's do that.
So what I've got here is this is just a sample database, a typical to-do app, with a single model, single database. We handle lots of different tables, but this gives you an idea of the simplest case. And it's an ASP.NET Core application running .NET 6. Pretty much all of this stuff. I mean, if you look at this is just setting up entity framework call.
Right.
Nothing special. The only bit that we add is there's a line here that says add data sync controllers. And there's a line here that says map controllers. That's because the whole system is an MVC architecture, so you still have controllers. You can't use minimal APIs, unfortunately, with this.
So this is setting up a DI container in the normal ASP.NET way.
Correct.
And then you're adding DB context, so you have entity framework available, and then in following the normal pattern of these things, you're adding these data sync controllers, which is the Azure Mobile Apps back-end stuff that it needs to do, right?
Precisely.
Okay.
So if I just switch around to the other pieces, your database context, you'll notice regular database context. Nothing special. You literally don't need to do anything special. The differences are in the models and the controllers that you use. So the model, we've got a couple of extra fields. So unlike your, and this is where the opinions of the platform come in to say, this is how we make sure that we can do things like incremental synchronization, so you're not dragging over the entire table every time you synchronize. There are 4 additional fields that are provided by this entity table data. They are an ID. Now, when you're dealing with offline, you can't use numeric IDs because numeric IDs have a large propensity to conflict. So when you're creating new records in an offline case, you need to have a globally unique ID. That means switching over to a string ID. So that's the first opinion that we make for you. Then there are 2 fields that help us with conflict resolution and incremental sync. The incremental sync part is we need to know when was the last time this record was updated. So there's an updated app field. The third one is this? How do we compare the records to make sure that they're the same or different? So there is a version field for that. Both of those fields are automatically maintained for you, so you don't have to do anything. They just have to exist. That's why they're in the entity table data. The 4th field is to support soft delete, which I'll talk about in a minute, but soft delete is just a Boolean to say, is this actually deleted or not? So those are the 4 fields. Now, soft delete is if you consider 2 offline clients and one client deletes a record, you're now saying, how does the other client know that record has been deleted? You can't just delete the record and then it just disappears and then there's no pull down to say that it needs. You need to mark it as deleted,
right.
and then all of the clients now get updated with that marked deleted, and then at some later date, all of the records that have been marked deleted, you can actually delete. So that's why we have the soft delete capability.
Yeah, I think soft delete is a fairly common thing that people do these days anyway, so that deletion becomes a less final thing, and you can go back and look at what was there, do auditing, do all of this good stuff.
Yeah,
we have a question from the chat, which I'm sure a lot of people are wondering about. Do you have to inherit from this entity table data, or they're saying through an API, or is there some way you can add the field yourself, or?
There's an interface actually. So we'll talk about repositories in a minute, but because this is not unique to Entity Framework, there's no requirement to use Entity Framework. It happens to be the most common way of getting access to the general databases that back these things. So we pair a concrete implementation of an interface. The interface is iTable data. So you've got a concrete implementation of that for Entity Framework, that's Entity Table data. And then you've got a repository that requires something that inherits from Entity Table data. And that sets up the required updates that are needed within the database for you.
Okay.
So
and we'll talk
away. Could you do you could inherit from iTable data and implement the fields yourself, certainly, but then you'd have to adjust the repository as well to match.
Yeah, makes sense. Hopefully we'll look at that a little bit more later.
Yeah. So that leads us on to the controller, and this is a complete controller. I'll get onto the access control thing, and you notice there's a couple of options so that we can talk about these. But the only thing that you need to do is set a repository, and that repository links Entity Framework Core to the patterns that we need, and this provides you with a search facility, the search ordering, skip, top, all of the other things in your list function, a get function, a create record, a delete record, a replace record, and a patch functionality, all within a single thing. So this is a complete controller for CRUDL on that table with full conflict resolution, incremental sync, and everything else that you would need.
So very little code you need to write here to get started with storing data and retrieving it, updating it, and all that stuff. Precisely.
So there are a couple of other repositories that we provide out of the box. The first one is LiteDB. It's if you're just going for I need a small NoSQL cache database on a single instance, then LiteDB is a great choice. You don't need Entity Framework for that. You just integrate it. We support AutoMapper. So if you've got a difference between your model on the database and the model that you want to expose to your client applications, you can do it with AutoMapper. We also have an in-memory store for those situations where you just have a cache kind of thing, and it's just implemented with a hash set underneath. So it's a kind of dictionary lookup capability. We do have a bunch of options that you can add, and if I just go here, you can see enable soft delete. We talked about soft delete. So normally soft delete is not enabled. In other words, when you delete on the API level, it actually deletes the record in your database. But if you enable soft delete, it marks it as deleted by setting the deleted field to true instead.
Why would you want to not have soft delete enabled?
There are regulatory industries that require immediate deletion.
Okay, interesting.
And again, we've been around for 10 years, so we're very conscious about when people upgrade, don't break them or don't change the behavior unexpectedly. So that's why you would not want soft delete, is because you've not had it forever and you want to continue as well. Max top and page size are about efficiency. So, if you've got a database table with, 100,000 records, but you don't want people to ask for 100,000 records at one time, you can set a max top. And the page size allows you to be efficient about transfers. So we page through the records when you ask for a list. So if you've got that 100,000 records in your database, we'll feed them out to you 50 at a time. But if you want to say, hey, I don't want 50 at a time, I want 500 at a time, you can set that on a per table basis, depending on the size of the record. There's obviously a trade-off there because we're mostly dealing with mobile applications because of the offline capability. And the trade-off is the larger the page size, the more likely you are to have a failure in the middle. And that page size is how much you have to rewind back to retransmit. And then the unauthorized status code is we actually have a relatively strong per record authorization scheme above and beyond what ASP.NET Core provides. And sometimes we have to specify the authorization. How would you deal with authorization?
Yes.
There's two parts to that, one of which we'll come on to, and the other side is establishing authorization the exact same way you do with ASP.NET Core. So in other words, you use authentication, use authorization, and then you add either the allow anonymous or the authorize attribute onto the controller.
Mm-hmm.
And
so because you're basically using ASP.NET Core here, you have all of the functionality that's already built into that to do the authorization.
Absolutely.
We've got a request here also can you increase the font size a little bit? Some people are having difficulty seeing that.
Yeah, let me see if I can 175. Oh, it doesn't like 175. Okay, 200. We'll see if that will work.
Yeah.
So other things that you can do, there's inbuilt logging that integrates directly with the locking mechanism for ASP.NET Core. And you'll hear this a lot. I try to integrate with the ASP.NET Core features as much as possible. So if you add an iLogger here, so again, dependency injection. So to do item controller logger. So if you inject it there, I can now specify here logger equals logger, and it will just work.
I see.
So that's the.
So the logger doesn't get. Question from me. I'm just curious. I'm sure there's a good reason for this, but why is the repository itself not injected into the controller?
There are multiple ways of and deciding whether to inject it or whether to create it is totally up to you and depends on you know.
So you could add it
to have it on a per call basis, a per controller basis, or a per or a per instance basis, and different providers will require or will support a different a different capability there. So it's you can do either way. For the in-memory controller, for example, for the in-memory repository, in order to make that available across all of them, you will want to establish the in-memory repository during your program.cs setup, and then inject it with DI as a singleton, and then pick it up in the controller as a parameter and set the repository there. So that's it.
So I have sure. So I have a pretty general, high-level kind of question. So is it correct to say that this is sort of like a higher-level layer over EF Core? Because what I see here, I'm looking at the controller. There's no EF queries, obviously. So that's one of the things that you guys are providing, right? You're simplifying. Basically, I don't have to write all these CRUD things, but it means that basically I'm effectively in some way not really using EF Core directly here.
Correct.
Would that be like a fair characterization?
Yeah, correct. We're basically saying, hey, set up EF Core with whatever settings you want, and we'll take it from there, and will do the right things to translate, for example, the OData query that comes in on a list operation into the appropriate EF query to get the records.
Okay,
so you
I
have
see.
your repository interface is basically what you're using, and that happens to be backed by EF Core in this case, but could be backed by something else.
Correct. And we have 4 implementations, only one of which is Entity Framework.
What are the others, out of curiosity?
The others are the in-memory, the in-memory hash set dictionary type thing, Lite DB,
Okay.
and an automapper driven one.
Okay.
Which could also be EF callback.
Sure, of course, yeah. We routinely get questions of people trying to use AutoMapper with EF directly without you guys obviously in the middle. So we're also quite aware of that. So then, if I did want to just to make sure I have my head around this correctly, if I did want to expose like some sort of REST endpoint or whatever, which does something fancy, like some group by query, like some fancy link query in EF terminology, and expose that basically as a REST endpoint, is that something that's possible? Or am I basically limited to the CRUD operations which you guys are kind of providing here? Would I do that somehow via? Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, you do that by implementing your own repository, and so we've got these 4 repositories, and they're all inheritable. So if, for example, you wanted to change the records that were coming back from the repository to do a group by or whatever. That's actually a fairly common one that I've documented on a blog. That is totally possible. The blog I mentioned, by the way, adrianhall.github.io, is my blog, and you'll find there's a series of like 6 blog posts in there that cover Entity Framework and working with Azure Mobile Apps.
We'll get our backroom team to add that to the show links, right, Jeremy?
Thanks. So the next thing that people generally ask is, okay, well, how can I deal with access control? Because now I want to, I've got my repository which returns.
We've got that question already in the chat.
Yeah. And how can I do it? And the answer to that is that we have a mechanism called an access control provider, which is this guy here. The access control provider. There we go. And if I just quick actions and I'm trying to look at the thing. Implement interface. Yes, there we go. The iAccess control provider is just 3 methods. And those 3 methods together provide all the implementation details necessary for the controller and the repository to understand what you're trying to do. The first one, get data view, basically is an expression that you can use in LINQ to say that is equivalent to a where statement. So this is injected into a where statement for LINQ and says, what view can I, the receiving, the person receiving the data, what view of that data can I see? So it's fairly common to include I can only view my records. As if you've got a big database and you only want someone to see their own to-do items, that's a very common thing. But you can say, I only want to see things that my group can show, or I only want to see active records, or whatever it is that you want to do. You can specify a where clause here to get the actual data view.
And you're saying you do that by whoever is authenticated, whoever's logged in. That's what you use to build that where clause.
Yeah, and we've got a piece in the documentation where you say use the HTTP accessor, HTTP context accessor, inject that in, and then build your access control provider using that, and then you have access to the username and or the email address or whatever you want to use to identify your users. The second one is authorized async, and we did async because you could be doing a database lookup to find out whether you're authenticated or rather, sorry, whether you're authorized to do a particular operation. So the table operation is read, delete, create, replace, and so on. And then there's the actual record item is the record that you're actually operating on. So can I read this item kind of thing?
That's the per record authorization system you were referring to.
Per record authorization system. And then the third thing is the pre-commit hook, where we go like, if you're trying to create or update or delete a record, you may need to do some adjustments to that record before it's committed. So, for example, if you're creating a new record and you've got a personal table, you want to attach the user ID for that user into the record from the authorization and not trust that the user is actually sending you the right data. You might not even expose that data to the user. So that the pre-commit hook allows you to modify the record immediately before it's stored in the database.
Makes sense.
And that's it. That's all you have to do. So that covers a whole bunch of options, and you can reuse these. I mean, the reason why we made it an interface and a class that you implement is you could have a generic access control provider, for example, for a personal table that implements another implementation detail of a user ID stored, and then do all of the authorization records to say this is my personal table. I can update and delete records and replace records that I've written, but I can only read records that I've created. So that sort of thing, it can be genericized across multiple tables.
Okay. So can we see this working with a
Yeah. Let me stop sharing this. Actually, I can stop screen. Let me just share another one, because what I've done is the thing that I created behind the scenes, I actually uploaded into an Azure App Service and linked to an Azure SQL database. So you can see here that I've got an Azure website with running this, and it's just a RESTful interface, so you can use standard HTTP calls. So sending the requests. The only addition is the Zumo API version. Now, someone previously said, "Is this compatible with the old .NET Framework 4.x synchronization?" No, it's not. Not exactly. We do have a backwards compatibility on the server side, but the client side is brand new.
But is it faster? Because I think that was one of the questions.
Faster? So there's multiple pieces there.
As always with Perf.
As always.
It depends.
It depends.
Yes. If you're looking at just the server side, it uses less resources, but the actual data transfer was the big thing for the .NET Framework versus the .NET Core version. It actually uses less resources, but it's not, quote, faster.
Right.
If you're using the new 5.0 client, .NET client, the big change that we made was the ability to do parallelized submissions. So in the old 4.2 version, which was the .NET Framework version, when we were processing the queue of changes to be submitted to the back end, we would do it serially. And you now have the option of doing it in a threaded manner.
Right.
And that's had about a 4x to 6x speed up over the old the old .NET Framework version, providing that your database doesn't have dependencies between records. And that's the big thing. If you need the records to be submitted in a certain order, you have to do them in that certain order. You don't get to play around with that. But you can do those decisions on how to push on a per table basis. So if you've got a big table that doesn't care, then you can do it parallelized, and then this other smaller table where it does care, you can do that serially. So you can do those decisions in code by yourself. So there's a Zumo API version 3.0.0. If you're using the 4.2 client, which is the older .NET Framework client, there's a Zumo API version 2.0.0 that you can use, and we support both at the same time. So get all items, you can see this is actually an OData query. So you get the full a full implementation of OData that then gets translated into a link query that gets applied to the data store that you've.
That's actually what I wanted to ask about. So basically, when I opt in, when I use your repository, you also bring in OData as a querying mechanism as well. I opt into that as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
of course, if I use a grouping or any sort of OData operator and so on, then the OData layer will translate that to link operators, which will get to EF core and so on and so forth.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, this is absolutely the easiest way of doing single table queries that you can go. Now, if you actually need that capability of doing queries between multiple tables and expand and all the goodness that OData provides you, then you're probably going to want to implement OData as a real thing. This is a simplified version, and that being simplified, we've made some decisions for you. Those decisions aren't appropriate in all cases. So that's common with any API, any SDK that has opinions. Those opinions are our opinions; they're not necessarily your opinions.
But that's the you don't have to get stuck in the either or syndrome, though, right? Just because you're using this to synchronize some tables doesn't mean you can't stand up an API with another set of capabilities for another area of functionality.
Correct. It's actually isolated to just the table controllers. So if you set up a different API, different endpoint, you can do what you need, even in the same code base. The get API is again we do the same things. If I actually look at the headers, you'll notice that e-tags, last modified, come back with it. So that's how we do concurrency checks. That's how we do conflict resolution as well. Create new items. You can either specify an ID or you can not specify an ID. So I'll just send this one. And you notice that it generates an ID for you and also generates the updated app versions and so on. So when I go back to get all items, I now have 3 items there.
Right. And the updated add and version and deleted, these are those fields you were talking about before, which you inherit when you extend your base class over there, right? Like how we saw before.
Correct. So and delete and edit are the same. One of the interesting things is if I do this one now. If you remember back to the to-do item, you noticed I put a data annotation that said title is required. So when we do the edit item, you get I didn't include the title. Title's required. So I got the title field is required. There's also a patch version. So if I just subtly change this to patch and I send it, it will now work because the put is a complete replacement. The patch is an incomplete replacement. So
that's how you can do basically a partial update of without sending everything.
Correct. And if I go back to this is test 1, 2, 3, 4, and we notice we've got B9C equals here. We had B9U equals. So this is the this is the versioning in action. The updated at has got millisecond accuracy, so that allows you to check whether even at the fastest level, that's enough accuracy to check which has been updated or not, and the version has been changed. That allows us to do concrete evaluations, even in the case where you get two records with exactly the same timestamp, which is would be remarkable. But given if you think of it as not just one instance of ASP.NET Core, but multiple instances of ASP.NET Core, all updating the same database at the same time, you could get conflicts like that. So the version will always change, and that since it's in this case it's a row version, but it will allow you to update the records on the client side appropriately.
Right.
So I did notice EF is mapped. It should support Oracle and PostgreSQL.
Some of these questions are not relevant to what we're actually talking about. They're just kind of general questions. I think there's one here from Jeremy that's kind of interesting. Is this carrying the name forward branding, or is this available as an Azure service? You said before, right, that you basically are running just a web app essentially.
Yeah, and it's certainly, you can run this anywhere. I mean, I'm running it as an app service right now, but you could run it in a container app. You could run it as a Kubernetes service. You could even run it on a VM or on-prem. You don't even have to run it in Azure. Azure Mobile Apps is the original name of the service. So going back again 10 years and more of a historical capability, we had an original service called Azure Mobile Services. That then got renamed when it got integrated into Azure App Services, Azure Mobile Apps. And then Azure Mobile Apps went away and became just an SDK. So we have the Azure Mobile Apps SDK, and we're just, it's one of those things. It's you can't change the branding because people will just continue using it anyway. So
yes, indeed.
Officially, it's called the namespace is Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.DataSync. It's the Microsoft DataSync framework, but we tried that out, and everyone said, "Yeah, but it's still Azure Mobile Apps." So
nice.
Okay, so a question here we have is a way to turn off page size and just push and pull all of it. And can you annotate objects as not updatable so it never goes over the wire?
So there's two parts to that. Can you turn off page size? No, you cannot, but you can make it as big as you want.
Int max value.
Exactly.
Max value is a value. Yeah. Can you annotate poco objects as not updatable? Well, we use Newtonsoft JSON to do the serialization, and so you can do a JSON ignore on the on the field, and then it won't be transmitted over the wire. Similarly, I would do something on the inbound side with a access control provider and that pre-commit hook. So a common thing is to make the user ID JSON ignored, and then set the user ID in the pre-commit hook so that it's being populated appropriately.
Sounds good. And then I think this has come up before when we've talked. Is it possible to use SQLite in the background as the server DB?
It's one of those yes, but. Yes, it is, but there's so much work to do in order to make it work. If you go into the GitHub repo, so we're open source, github.com/Azure/Azure-mobile-apps. And all the source code is there and all of our tests are there. If you look at the tests, we actually use SQLite as a backend database.
Right.
And we had to do so much work in order to make it work. And the specific thing is that SQLite does not store timestamps with millisecond accuracy. So we actually have to translate any date timestamps into a number of milliseconds since an epoch, and then translate them back again. So that work has to be done before you can use SQLite as a backend. And even then, I occasionally run into issues where two records are trying to update SQLite at the same time, and they enter into a problem, and one gets updated and the other one doesn't, and it's just it's not good.
Right.
So don't do it. If you want to do that, I would probably recommend one of the other on-device databases that are available. Whether it's SQL Server, LiteDB, whatever. It's they're available as well.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that if you have an existing database, then this is probably not going to be the thing that you want to use, right? Because you wouldn't have string keys likely and these extra fields and everything. So this is more something if you're kind of greenfield and you need to store this data, but it's not something that you have an existing database for.
Correct. I mean, I have done work with Azure customers before where we've augmented their database tables with another database table, and then we look at the view of the two joined together.
Right.
The new database table is like basically those 4 fields. And it's always a mess.
Right. Which I think brings us into to this question we hear. Why would you choose this over straight web services and EF? And I think the answer is because if you just want a simple solution that does all of these things for you and is very easy to use, then this is the way to go, right? If you need full control, then you probably want to go and rather than make this complicated and ugly, you want to go off and just do your own thing with EF or whatever and your database.
Yeah, as a server side only, it does simplify things if all you're doing is this. I mean, the amount of code that you have to write is less. And we'll come to, and it has full conflict resolution. It has incremental sync capabilities. All these things.
Yeah.
If you want a complete end-to-end solution, the client side of this, which we haven't talked about.
Do you have a demo on the client side?
I do have demos, and I'll let me just again switch views back into the Visual Studio. In this view, and I apologize for the small window. We have solutions for Maui, we have Avalonia, we have UWP, WinUI3, and WPF. We have Xamarin Forms and Xamarin Native, so Android and iOS, all using the same .NET library. So we have and I've also got another one in the background that I haven't published yet for the Uno platform. I have Blazor. We have a TypeScript library coming out for React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, and so on. So there's a lot of work being done on the client side to make this offline capable functionality. Right. And synchronizing data is not straightforward. So
yes, indeed.
If all you're doing is you want to produce an API, a web API that does REST, and you're going to write your own client to access it, great. If it works for you, it works for you. Where it comes into its own is these capabilities and doing the authorization and the synchronization to that on-device SQLite database.
Makes sense.
And
that's the complicated stuff. So it's
Yeah, I have a question. Like maybe stepping back a little bit. So I think it was maybe a year or two ago we hosted another approach to the database sync problem. .mim sync or something like that. I don't remember the exact name anymore. It was an interesting, and basically, so when I did a little bit of research on this, then when you think about a database sync, then you think about something that will indeed add some fields to your data model and so on for those things like when you were last updated and all that kind of stuff, and then you need the infrastructure for actually synchronizing. But what I find interesting here is that this goes this is a full layer that takes care of much more. So it's not purely just a data sync, from what I understand. It doesn't just take care of the data sync problem. It also, removes the code of actually having to write queries, for example. It also takes care of authorization. You mentioned, logging concerns. So this is more of a full turnkey solution that seems to go well beyond only taking care of the raw low-level problem of how do I sync my tables across my on-device database and my source of truth at the server side, right? And I'm kind of interested in how this came about historically or the logic around it.
Yeah, I mean, historically it was, as I said, there was an Azure Mobile Services, which was an actual Azure service. And then we said, this really makes sense as an SDK instead. So we became Azure Mobile Apps, and we literally just took the code that was in the service and exposed it. What we tried to do was say, okay, let's talk not about synchronization of data. Let's talk about synchronization of data in a mobile or client perspective, and what does that actually require? And it's not just, and then let's take a look at the surrounding points of view. So I might have a mobile app, an Android and an iOS app, but I might also have a web application that's online that I need to access exactly the same data. I might have a desktop application that needs to access exactly the same data. And that was the perspective we went. And each time we've gone through a change and a new revision of the code, we've basically said, how can we make it easier for people to adopt this technology? The original version was kind of hairy. It was, there was a lot of code to write, and there were a lot of decisions to make. Once we realized, just as for example, conflict resolution. I get here's a conflict. Here's the old record and the new record. Figure out what to do. And go do it. And now we've got the first revolution was now go do it was actually methods that say, okay, I'm going to, accept the server, I'm going to accept the client, I'm going to do a merge or whatever. And then we got to the point where we go okay, people are always going to accept the client version 99% of the time. When you are presented with a conflict screen, which you don't see that much anymore, you're going to accept your version over what's on the server. That's natural human nature. So let's make that easy. And each time we've made this stuff easier and easier and easier, we still give you the power behind the scenes. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from writing the list operation because you don't like OData for some reason. You want to do your own. There's nothing wrong with you doing that. We've actually allowed you to do that in the controller, but you don't have to. We've got simple is a one-liner. Set the repository, you're done. Oh, you want more? There's more, even down to overriding individual methods and spinning your own. And yeah, absolutely, you could spin your own web API with the full EF core capabilities, your own queries, conflict resolution, the whole thing. Sure. I happen to know how much code that is. For every single table, if you're repeating that code over and over and over again, it becomes a problem. Maintainability.
Clearly, I mean, I hope people here appreciate, our viewers, that I don't know if people here have tried to, tackle the sync problem between two databases or between client and server. It's a very, very tricky problem, right? By the way, By the way, that's kind of funny. So as you're talking, we have a very reduced version of that problem inside EF Core with optimistic concurrency. So we do have, it's a different thing, but it's interesting to compare. We do have this problem where, for example, you query something from the database. This is pure EF Core, has nothing to do with sync. You want to make a change to some property and then you want to save it back. But what happens if that database row has already been updated? So EF Core has this whole machinery around concurrency tokens, which is a little bit similar to the stuff that you guys have just added here in the data model. Of course, the problem is very reduced because the what EF Core has to do, what EF Core does, has a very reduced scope of I've queried and now I'm saving. There's no sync between two complete different databases that have to that you then have to keep in sync. Of course, it's a very temporary and local kind of problem, and yet we already know how complicated it is and how difficult it is for users. So this same thing that you were just saying, what happens if there is a concurrent update, right? Do you accept your changes as the user? Do you overwrite? Do you try to merge your changes into it? All these kinds of things. We also have a reduced version of inside EF Core without all the database sync. So
we actually use underneath the covers. If you go and see the code within the repository, we actually use that optimistic concurrency piece at the very repository level. But we also layer on it because we know conflicts happen much more frequently when you're offline for weeks at a time.
Yeah.
Exactly. Our conflicts are when people literally are working exactly at the same time, right? Or when two processes are literally updating the database at the same time. Whereas once you go offline, things become way more, much different, right?
Yeah.
So
there's a great question that came in here about synchronization. Is it a pull model to synchronize, or is there a push model? Are events fired as data changes from other clients?
So interesting question. If you're using our client, in the next release, we will have those synchronization events. They're actually in the main branch right now. The 5.0.12 release will be coming out probably next Friday. I'm hoping next Friday, and that will have the synchronization progress event handler in it. I've also been asked, and this is a feature request that is probably 3 or 4 weeks out, to have the capability of linking in a SignalR or WebSocket service into the server, so that your clients can be notified of changes as they happen. And that we're still working on the architecture for, so it's a few weeks out from being finalized. But that's another one that
sounds good.
It's not just localized to the client. Localized to the client next week. Client and server, that'll be a bit further out.
So that goes even further beyond, just syncing data, right? Now you're actually transmitting changes as they occur as real-time changes as well via SignalR and stuff like that. That's yet another level.
And these are some of the problems that as you focus in on the mobile or client application, you start going like, how do I get data from A to B is really the problem, and keep it in step. You want everyone to have the precious data without having latency. As that requirement, there are technical solutions to it, but they become more and more complicated.
Yes, indeed.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, this has been really good. Thank you very much, Adrian, for coming in and showing us all this stuff. It's really interesting. And you guys have any more questions, or should we wrap there and come back next time with something more? Okay,
I think that's a wrap.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again, Adrian. Really appreciate having you on the show.
Very interesting. Very good to see.
Yeah. Everybody, remember, keep it chargeable, and we'll see you next time for another one of these.